Leningrad, September 1941. You are 19 years old and your hands smell of machine oil. You have worked the lathe at the Kirov Plant since you were 16, turning steel for tractors and now for tanks. You have never fired a rifle. Your mother waits for you every evening by the same courtyard gate on Vasilyevsky Island, and your sister Nadia, 17, still carries her school books wrapped in brown paper because no one has told her school is finished. Leningrad in the summer of 1941 is a city of nearly 3 million people, canals and bridges, the Hermitage Museum with its green roof, the Kirov Plant humming day and night. Your father died 2 winters ago, so it is you, your mother, and Nadia in 2 rooms near the factory. On Sundays, you walk the embankment and Nadia reads to you from a library book because she wants to be a teacher. This is your ordinary world, and you do not yet know how little of it will remain. On June 22nd, Germany invades the Soviet Union. Within weeks, the front moves east faster than anyone in the city believed possible. By late August, German Army Group North has cut the rail line south of the city, and Finnish forces close in from the north. On September 8, 1941, the last road out of Leningrad is severed. The city is surrounded. You are told this by a foreman at the plant, not a general, standing on an overturned crate, and his voice does not shake, which frightens you more than shouting would have. That same week, General Georgy Zhukov arrives to take command of the city's defense, replacing a commander who could not hold the line. Zhukov orders every able body to dig. You spend 3 days building anti-tank ditches on the city's southern edge, your factory hands blistering around a shovel handle instead of a lathe crank. The Kirov plant itself sits so close to the front that workers can hear German artillery while assembling tank hulls. You keep working because a factory that stops is a factory the enemy has already won. The bombing starts within days. On September 8th, the same day the ring closes, German incendiary bombs hit the Badayev warehouses, where much of the city's food reserves are stored. Fires burn for hours. No one in your building says the word famine yet. But your mother begins locking the bread in a tin box, and you notice she has started counting, out loud, the number of days since the last delivery truck reached your street. By November, the ration card system tightens by the week. On November 20th, 1941, the bread allowance for dependents like your mother and Nadia drops to 125 grams a day, a slice the size of a matchbox, baked with sawdust and cottonseed cake because there is no flour left to spare. You give Nadia half of your worker's ration without telling her, folding it into her coat pocket while she sleeps. She never says whether she notices. The first winter is the coldest anyone remembers, and the city has no heat because the fuel meant for homes has gone to the front and to the factories still turning out shells. You burn furniture in a metal stove. Streetcars stop running in December, frozen where they stand, and stay there, silent, all winter. People pull sledges instead of using them for children, because a sledge is now how you move the dead to the cemetery, since no one has the strength left to dig graves in frozen ground. Then, on November 22, 1941, trucks begin crossing the ice of Lake Ladoga, the only route left into the city. Soldiers call it the Road of Life. The ice is thin in places, and drivers leave their cab doors open so they can jump if the truck falls through. You watch one convoy arrive at a distribution point near the plant, and you count the trucks twice, because the number matters more than anything else you have counted this winter. Leningrad, January 1942. You are still 19, still at the lathe, though your ration card now buys less than it did in autumn. Your mother stops walking to the bakery herself, because the queue takes 4 hours, and she no longer has 4 hours of strength in her legs. Nadia goes instead, before school, though school meets only twice a week now, in a cold classroom with the windows taped against blast damage. The city's death toll climbs through the winter in a way official reports call unprecedented, and civilians simply call January. Bodies wait on the street because the cemeteries cannot keep pace, wrapped in sheets, marked with names pinned to the cloth so families can be found later. You pass 3 such shapes on your walk to the plant one morning, and you stop counting after that, because counting has become its own kind of grief. The Kirov plant keeps building tanks through the siege, moving assembly lines underground and into workshops closer to the front to save fuel on transport. You work 12-hour shifts on rationed calories, and twice you see men collapse at their stations from hunger, not injury. The foreman does not send them home. There is no home warmer than the shop floor, where the machines still generate a little heat. Your unit at the plant loses 2 workers that month, both older men who had trained you on the lathe when you first arrived at 16. No funeral is held. Their names go on a list posted by the timekeeper's office, and the list grows longer through February than any single sheet of paper was built to hold. You learn to read the list without reading the names, a small mercy your mind invents for itself. In February, a directive arrives ordering the evacuation of children across the Ladoga ice while it still holds. Nadia's name appears on a list posted at her school, one of several hundred children scheduled for the next convoy east. Your mother argues to keep her, then does not argue, because staying means the same ration card, the same slice of matchbox bread, another month like this one. You walk Nadia to the assembly point near the lake shore on a morning in March 1942. She wears 2 coats and carries 1 bag, the library book still inside it, unfinished. She tells you she will finish it in Kazan, where the convoy is bound, and write to you the moment she arrives. You believe her, because the alternative is standing at that dock and believing nothing at all. The convoy leaves before dawn, a line of trucks each carrying 20 to 30 children across ice that has begun, by March, to soften at its edges. Drivers space the trucks apart so that if the ice gives way beneath one, it does not take the next. You watch the taillights until the lake swallows them into fog, and you walk back to the plant, because the lathe does not stop for goodbyes. 3 weeks pass. No letter arrives from Kazan. You ask at the evacuation office near the Finland station, and a clerk checks a list, then checks it again, and tells you the convoy's full manifest has not yet been reconciled with arrival records on the other shore. He is not unkind. He is simply one clerk with one incomplete ledger in a city moving thousands of names by ice road, rail, and barge, faster than any office can track them.
Leningrad, autumn 1942. You are 20 now, still at the Kirov plant, still writing to an address in Kazan that has never written back. Your mother keeps Nadia's second coat folded on a shelf, because putting it away in a trunk would mean deciding something neither of you is ready to decide. The city around you has changed. Fewer bodies wait on the street. A vegetable garden grows in a park that used to hold roses. People have learned how to survive a siege, because there has been no other choice for a year. You write to the evacuation registry in Kazan twice that autumn. The first reply, delayed months, lists 3 children with names close to Nadia's, none matching exactly. The second reply never comes at all. Your mother stops asking you to read the mail aloud, because your face already tells her the answer before you speak it. In January 1943, Soviet forces launch Operation Iskra, breaking the ring along a narrow corridor south of Lake Ladoga. A rail line opens within weeks, thin and shelled daily by German artillery from higher ground nearby, but it is a line, and it is more than the ice ever was. Food arrives faster. Bread rations rise for the first time since the ring closed. Your foreman posts the new allocation on the same overturned crate he once stood on to announce the siege itself, and this time his voice does shake, just slightly. The full siege does not end that winter. German forces still hold the southern approaches, still shell the city on quiet mornings for no reason anyone can predict. You keep working, because the tanks your hands help build are now moving west instead of only defending the plant's own perimeter. Word reaches the city that the front, after 2 years of holding the line at your doorstep, has finally begun to move in the other direction. On January 27, 1944, Soviet forces fully lift the Siege of Leningrad, 872 days after the ring first closed around your city. Church bells that have not rung since 1941 ring that evening. You stand in the courtyard where your mother once waited for you every night, and for the first time in years, She is the one waiting outside to hear you come home, rather than the other way around. Historians still do not agree on how many died inside the siege. Estimates for Leningrad's civilian dead range from 600,000 to 1.5 million, a gap of nearly 1 million lives that no single archive has closed. Your mother lives to see the city rebuilt around the same courtyard gate. You never learn what happened to the convoy that carried Nadia across the ice in March 1942, whether it reached Kazan, whether her letter was lost, delayed, or never written at all. Decades later, researchers opening Kazan's regional evacuation archives find gaps still uncatalogued from that winter. Whole convoy manifests never cross-checked against arrival lists on the far shore. You keep the library book's title in your memory, the one she meant to finish and mail back. Some ledgers in this city were never reconciled.